righteous witness. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute, so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. You shall not show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. If you see the donkey, one who hates you, lying under its burden, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it. You shall not pervert the judgment of your poor in his dispute. Keep yourself far from a false matter. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. And you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the discerning and perverts the words of the righteous. Also you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its produce. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. In like manner you shall do with your vineyard and your olive grove. 6 days you shall do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female servant and the stranger may be refreshed. And in all that I have said to you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, nor let it be heard from your mouth. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. You may be seated. A couple of things in here I addressed last week. For example, oppressing a stranger. But there are a number of issues in here which we ought to look at, because our world is constantly filled with it. The very first one says, don't circulate a falsehood. Just before service this morning, some of us were talking about that very thing. You know, it's very easy to hear something and to spread it. And unless you've really checked the sources, you can get some wrongs. And sometimes we can actually get a rumor started by simply saying something and forgetting the name and getting a wrong name in there, and then somebody takes what we've said and goes on with it, and the Lord knows I've used wrong names, you know, when I've been talking about something. It's a very common thing for people who speak in public to say things, well, you know, as Moses said, and it's really somebody else who said it. But it's also the kind of thing where, oh, did you hear this? So-and-so was in a car wreck. But it wasn't that person, it was somebody else. And then if you have a name like my name, where it seems like half the world's population has it, there are all kinds of rumors that take place, some good, some bad. You know, I got complimented one time for the wonderful job I did at a wedding in Hammondsport. I said, I never did a wedding in Hammondsport. Yeah, the people said you did a great job. I said, I didn't do a wedding in Hammondsport. Then I found out that there's another pastor in the area out that way with the same name. The more astounding thing, of course, is when I walked into the bank and was told that according to the bank records, I was dead. Because Donna M. Brown went in to report that Gary L. Brown had died. But it was a Donna M. Brown and a Gary L. Brown that lived in Hornell. Went to the same bank. Thankfully, I got that straightened out. But I do know that throughout my life, I have been victimized by people circulating false stories. The worst one happened 20 years ago, in which my character was greatly defamed. But I remember years before that, I pastored a church in Ticonderoga, and we bought some land and put up a building. And apparently people in the community talked, wondering how we could do that. And a couple of nurses were up at the hospital talking, and one nurse suggested, well, maybe it's because when he goes and visits elderly women, he gets money from them. I had people quit coming to the church. And when I went to them, I said, why did you quit coming? We're not going to go to any church where the pastor goes around milking money from all these old women. Total false report. False reports steal a person's good name. They cause people to act in such bad ways. And that's in a personal level, but when you look at what takes place down in a place like Washington, D.C., and all the falsehoods that get circulated and people testifying to falsehoods. It's amazing. God is not pleased with this. He's also said another thing. He brings about two things. He said, don't side with the poor person in his dispute. And then later on he says, don't side against him. And let's talk about that for a minute. It's easy to see why, if there are two people in dispute, why somebody might side with a rich person in their dispute because they're hoping for favors from that rich person. It happens all the time. It's happened with me. It seems to, for some reason, I have all these wonderful, weird stories to tell about things that have happened. You know, I had a woman one time come after me with a knife to stab me because I had declined to let her daughter sing special music in the church. Wow. It's interesting, people's reactions. But we can understand, because people say, well, you know, if this person are in a dispute, and I go ahead and give testimony for this person, then they'll treat me right. And I want to be treated right. And, you know, that's why today we have people who are paid witnesses. And whatever you pay them to testify, that's what they'll testify. You know, they're experts and they'll testify this way, but if somebody else is paying the other side, he'll testify the opposite, and the jury's trying to figure out, well, which expert is right. But then there's the reverse issue. Now let me just throw out a story which is completely untrue. It's totally fictional. Let's say Bill Gates, I don't know if he's still the richest man on the planet, but he's pretty rich. Let's say he's driving along in his whatever car it is, whether it's a Rolls Royce or a Bentley or whatever expensive car it is. And he's driving along. And all of a sudden, as he's driving along, somebody comes from a side street and T-bones him and does a lot of damage. And it turns out that the person who did it was driving a car that didn't belong to him, and he didn't have a license, and it wasn't insured or registered. But you find out the reason why all that was true is because the man was desperately poor, and he was in the middle of rushing his little infant daughter to the emergency room. Who's at fault in the accident? You can't side with the poor man just because he's poor. If Bill Gates says, my lawyer's going to sue you for the damages, that's the way it is. Now, in the eyes of the law, I believe that most judges would say, we are not going to hold the man liable, or we will not cite him for unregistered, unlicensed, uninsured use of a vehicle because he was doing so to save a life. You know, it is against the law to trespass, but if you trespass in order to pull somebody out of a burning building, that's okay. Okay? There are laws to take. Now, our brains tell us, my goodness, if you're a guy like Bill Gates, what you should do is say to the poor man, don't worry about the car, let me take care of your daughter's doctor's bills. That's what we would like to have happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if that didn't happen, because we know that the Bill and Melinda Gates multiply millions of dollars in charities around the world. But let's say he didn't. You still can't side with somebody just because you feel sorry for them. Now, God has some choice words for people who are rich and don't take care of those who are poor. But I will tell you this, in our body politic today, there is much conversation, not just in this country, but around the world, which says poor people have a right to rich people's money. And that is an absolute falsehood. It's false. It's wrong. Us poor people don't. In the eyes of the world, let me put it to you this way. There's nobody sitting here that I think that in the United States, in terms of what the United States is, would be considered a wealthy person. Right? None of us fit that category.
No.
But in the eyes of most of this world, we are rich beyond measure. We get to see doctors. We get to eat 3 meals a day. We get to live in houses, even houses that are even heated and have windows. We get to have an education. According to most of the rest of the world, especially the world throughout history, we are wealthy beyond imagination. It's all relative. But I think about this. The Bible has some really choice words to say about well-to-do people who don't take care of poor people. James says, "Go to now, you rich. Weep and howl for the miseries that will come upon you." Not that just being rich means you're going to have that happen. Abraham was rich, David was rich, Solomon was rich, A lot of rich people in the world that did a lot of good things. But he's talking about people who are rich who use their riches in the wrong way. And then he says, "Has not God chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and inheritors of the promises?" Because those who are poor are constantly imploring God for things. I've had this conversation with Anthony. When my series of clunkers died, it's kind of humorous in retrospect. How many times can you have a clunker die in a month? We wound up bringing 4 cars to the junkyard in a period of a month and a half, right? I didn't sweat it. Okay, I'll just go to Simmons Rockwell and lease a car. That's what having some resources does. But when I was 22 and didn't have a car and had no money and didn't know anybody else to ask for, I got on my knees and pleaded with God, "I need a car." And before the day was over, God gave me a car. It didn't cost me a dime. God develops our faith that way. But we cannot side with a poor person in this case, nor can we side with a rich person. We are to do what is just, always. And we have a whole legal system and political system and court system which doesn't care about justice. You think it does. We call it the Department of Justice. It doesn't care about justice. But that's one issue. I want to get back and just to refresh my memory, I'm going to go here. Okay, he says, "Do not kill the innocent and the righteous." That happens all the time. And by the way, one of the reasons why I don't necessarily agree with laws in the United States or some states, for example, with regard to the death penalty, the Bible calls for the death penalty. I believe in the death penalty, but the death penalty shall never be given unless there are 2 or 3 eyewitnesses to the fact. And we have all kinds of people who are sitting on death row and some have been executed because of circumstantial evidence or one eyewitness or the testimony of worthless people, in other words, a jailhouse testimony, only later on to have found out using modern scientific methods that it wasn't him or her. I think if you stay biblical, you stay right. And again, our country has jettisoned the Bible as a guide years ago. Then it says, "Don't take a bribe." Now, in our culture, so far, that makes sense. When officials take bribes, we don't want those kinds of people. But you have to understand, in much of the world, bribery is how you get anything done. A lot of years ago, I worked for a place in Toccoa, Georgia, and they mailed out pants and shirts all over to people under different name labels. They got this really special deal from Hong Kong, and they ordered a bunch of blue jeans, and they didn't come. And they didn't come. And they didn't come, and they were promised to come. And finally, somebody in our government went to the people who ran the place and said, "You guys don't understand how things work, do you? What are you talking about? We paid for this, we paid for the shipping, we paid for the customs, we paid for all this." I said, "Yeah, but you didn't grease any palms. It's not going to happen if you don't grease this person's palm and that person's palm and this person's palm." And they said, "But that's not, we don't believe in that. That's not legal." They said, "If you want the stuff, that's what you're going to have to do." So they greased the palms and things came. That's the way most of the world operates. But he says, "You shall not take a bribe." Bribery perverts justice, and God is all about justice. Now, he switches gears. And I may get this right yet. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its produce, but the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow. We'll just stop right there. Every 7th year, the farmers, which was almost everybody, was told, you can't grow anything. If it comes up by itself, that's okay. We've had things come up on parcels of land. It's like, we never planted that. How did it come up on its own? And sometimes things come back that had been planted the year before that we weren't expecting. He says, let it rest. Now, modern science has proven and shown that it's important to let land rest. But that's not the reason why God gives. But one of the interesting things is, according to the biblical record, as far as we can tell, and as far as the Jewish people's history can tell, they never obeyed this law. And how do we know this? Because the prophet tells us this. That when they were kicked out of the promised land and were sent to captivity, they were gone and the land was left fallow, equaling the number of years that they had not obeyed. God said, okay, you're not going to let it rest every 7th year? Fine, I've had it up to here, it's going to rest. But God gives a different reason, not just for the land. He says, let it rest. It needs to lie fallow. That's important. But he says, the poor people may eat. They can go and get it. Last week I talked about them gleaning after harvest. He also says that the beasts of the field may eat. God cares about the beasts of the field. Isn't it interesting that Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, have you considered the lilies of the field? How they don't toil or spin. But Solomon, all his glory, was not arrayed like one of them. The sparrows can't fall to the ground without God knowing about it. God cares about it. He says, do the same thing with your vineyard, with your olive grove. And then he gets back to the weekly thing. 6 days you shall do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest. I love this. That your ox and your donkey may rest. And the son of your female servant and the stranger may be refreshed. Now here's the interesting thing. The Bible also has other commands about animals. And I think I skipped a passage. Yes, I did. I'll get back to it. The donkey and the ox, what were they? They were slaves. They just worked. And donkeys were oftentimes beaten to get them to do the thing they had to do. And oxen, they're nothing but dumb oxen. The ox and the donkey don't know when the 7th day is. They don't have a calendar. The Bible says, don't muzzle an ox while it's treading. Let the poor animal eat. And the point is this, that long before PETA existed, God cares about animals. He cares about them. They've gone overboard. They care more about animals than they do about people. And they do things that are wicked. And they do illegal things in order to advance their cause. But the fact of the matter is that how you treat your animal says something about you. But it says something about God right here that he says, your work animals need rest. I noticed that he didn't mention horses in here. This is a question that I could ask. Why do you think he didn't mention horses? Why just donkeys and oxen?
They didn't have them.
They didn't have any. Exactly. Even King David didn't ride around on a horse. You know, the Egyptians had horses, the Babylonians had horses, and whatever. They didn't have horses. Why bring up a thing that, you know? But then he says, the son of your female servant. Now, there's already been a law that says your servants have to rest. But the son of a female servant might not technically be considered a servant. She's a servant, except her little boy still has to do work. Notice in the responsive reading today, he mentions, surely I am your servant, the son of your handmaid. In a large household, or any kind of household that might have servants, there's a pecking order. There always is. By the way, in hen yards, chicken yards, among the hens, there truly is a pecking order. There's a reason why it's called that. But there's a pecking order. Who do you think is at the very bottom of the pecking order? The child of the female servant. He counts for squat. And God puts in here, you are to take a day off. He doesn't say because you need a day off. He doesn't say that. He says, your ox and your donkey and your servant and your female servants, kid, need a rest. It's interesting that Jesus, when he spoke, said, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you Sabbath. That's the word. That's what Sabbath means. This is the Sabbath. You are to observe the Sabbath. You are to observe rest. We all need rest. And God does it this way. He says, look, I rested on the seventh day. If I want to rest, you should have a rest. And it's interesting that throughout history, people have tried to reorganize society so that there wasn't a 7-day week. Instead, there was a 10-day week. And it's all failed. Because universally across the globe, in every society, societies that never had any contact with each other, they would observe a 7-day week. But you know, for the 430 years that the Jews were slaves in Egypt, they didn't get a day of rest. The pharaohs worked them as slaves, and hundreds of thousands of them died building pyramids. I want to back up. God's still caring about the animals. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under his burden, you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it. Now, God has already told us what to do if we see a neighbor's animal wandering free, and I've told my bizarre little story about how I learned that that actually works in today's world. But now he brings up something specific. This is your enemy, somebody who hates you, and you see their donkey, and the guy's struggling to get that donkey out of the ditch. The normal human reaction is, good for him. He's going to lose his donkey. It couldn't have happened to a better person. Right? And God is saying, leave your stupid, hateful neighbor out of it. I care about the ox and the donkey. You bring it back to him. It's his. You help him get him out of the ditch. The donkey needs to be gotten out of the ditch for the sake of the donkey. has bigger plans than this in it. What happens when somebody hates you and then you do something good for him, like helping him get his donkey out of the ditch? What is going to happen? Well, we're told that there's one of two things that are going to happen. Either that person who hates you will say, well, maybe I was wrong about him. Maybe he's not such a bad guy after all. Maybe I'll stop hating him. That's one possibility. The other possibility is this. We're told to do good to those who've done evil to us. He said, in so doing, you shall heap coals of fire upon his head. What is that saying? Don't you heap the coals. It's saying that God is going to look at him and say, fellow, you hated without a cause. And when the person you hated did good for you, you didn't reciprocate the right way. It's going to be even worse for you in the judgment. You see, one of the things that you have to realize is in this life, we will not receive justice. It's not, some people get a little smattering of justice. This past week, Nick Sandman, anybody know Nick Sandman? He became rather famous because CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Democratic Party, all kinds of people maligned the man and accused this 17-year-old boy of something he never did. They threatened his parents. They threatened the parents' employers with firing if they didn't if they didn't deal with this kid. And it turned out the whole thing was an absolute lie. CNN just had to pay him a bundle of money. And Washington Post will probably have to, and New York Times probably will have to. And those of us like me say, yes. He is a rare case. The little girl that's stolen from her family and sold to some rich person in the Middle East to be a toy, she'll never receive justice in this life. That's why when the Creed says, from there, from heaven, at the right hand of the Father, he shall come to judge the living and the dead. We rejoice because God will make all things right. Those people who've lied about me in the past, I don't want them to wind up in some kind of eternal hell for that, because my life hasn't been made a hell because of it. I've been unhappy about it. But I do want what Jesus is going to say to them, why did you carry that false story about him? We have to give an account. That's what we're told. We must give an account for every word that comes out of our mouths. Who do we have to give it to? We have to give it to the Lord Jesus. Now I'll tell you something. I have not been an axe murderer, thank God. Nor have I done a lot of other things. I have not caused genocide. But I know this, that when I get to see Jesus, he's probably going to mention a few things to me. And I'm going to thank him for his mercy and his grace, because I don't deserve to go to heaven. Neither do you. He's going to bring me there. But notice what he's done in this scripture. He's telling us how we ought to live, because he knows that in our world nobody lives that way unless we're told to. And finally, he says this, and in everything that I've said to you, be circumspect. Make no mention of the name of other gods. Don't even let it come out of your mouth. Now, I'm sure that what he's saying is that when we talk about the planet Jupiter or Saturn or Mars, that we're in deep trouble with God because we're using the name of other gods. That's nonsense. But if you say this, with the help of Mars, I'm going to get even with my enemy, we may think that's a bunch of silliness today. But people used to do that. Maybe Athena can help me find true love. All those different things, they all appealed to these different gods and did horrible things. And he says, this group of people were raised in a culture where everybody believed in all kinds of gods. And he said, no, I'm the only God. If anything good happens to you, you give me credit. If anything bad happens to you, you appeal to me. Our lives, the rules by which we live, come from this person, these people, because God is a people. He is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that's his name. And we ought not to give credit. We ought not to give blame for anything, everything that comes about. So if we see our enemy's donkey in the ditch, it's because God made sure that we were there to see the donkey in the ditch. I have a letter I have to write. Some people I met a few weeks ago. I just want to say, how you doing? Are you feeling okay? Isn't it wonderful that God saw fit that when you had your accident, it was right in front of my house so I could help you? And have you wondered why? That incident that happened a few years ago you told me about, why God preserved you. Must be that he has something for you in this life. People need to be reminded that whether it's good or evil or whatever it is, it comes because God arranges it. God's not behind it, but he makes sure things happen the way they happen. False reports will circulate about people. They just will. I'll just share this one little thing. When God first started dealing with me before he called me into the ministry, he woke me up one night and gave me a Bible verse. I found it there, well actually a whole passage. And part of the passage said that people would gather together to lie about me. And I was a brand new Christian. I was like, why? Why, God? Because that's what happens to his servants. Nobody has been lied about more than one person. Who do you think the person is that has been lied about more than any other person? Jesus Christ. So if you're going to lie about him, join the club. They will. But God justifies us. I love it that in Romans the Apostle Paul says, who can say anything against God's elect? It's God who justifies. It's God who makes us righteous. If God is for us, who can be against us? Well, the whole world can be, but they don't count. We have these rules. It's designed to help us think about how we ought to be representatives of God in our world. Let's be good representatives of the gracious Father and the loving Son and the close Holy Spirit who governs our lives and leads us in paths of righteousness.